beautiful soul, and welcome to Back to the Beginning Root Cause Conversations. I'm your host, Mona-Lize, a trauma informed holistic therapist specializing in healing trauma at its root cause and how that transforms human connection. In this podcast, you can expect deep conversations about trauma healing, navigating your spirituality in this complex 3D world, and real transformation stories from people who've done the work. This is where spiritual depth meets practical reality. So without further ado, let's dive in. Well, hello, beautiful human, and welcome to Back to the Beginning Root Cause Conversations. I'm Mona-Lize, and today we're diving into the anatomy of trauma, specifically why people can experience something difficult and bounce back in weeks, while others get stuck for like months or even years. Here's a question that's been on my mind for a little while. Have you ever noticed how two people can go through a similar traumatic experience, but their recovery looks completely different? Person A experiences a betrayal and processes it in therapy for 3 weeks. Person B experiences the same type of betrayal and is still struggling 2 years later. What's the difference? It's not about being stronger or weaker. It's not about having better coping skills or a more positive mindset. It's about understanding the anatomy of trauma, how it shows up in your nervous system, how it gets stored in your body, and most importantly, whether you've done the foundational work that changes everything. Because here's what I want you to know right from the start. When life throws you yet another curveball after you've done the deep healing work, your healing isn't negated. Your progress isn't erased. But there's a specific anatomy to what's happening, and understanding this anatomy is the difference between bouncing back and staying stuck. Today, we're going to break down 3 different experiences that can feel similar, but are actually completely different. First, triggers, then traumatic memories coming to the surface, and finally, when new trauma actually occurs. And I'm going to share with you why understanding this, and more importantly, doing the root cause healing work, changes absolutely everything about how you navigate these experiences. This is your judgment-free zone as always. Whatever you're going through, whatever timeline you're on, your experience is valid, and we're going to figure this out together. Let me start with something that happened to me recently that really crystallized this whole concept. Without going into specific details, because the specifics aren't really called for here, I experienced something that fell directly into the same category as one of my deepest root wounds. And in that moment, I got to witness my own trauma response in real time. I felt that familiar surge of adrenaline, that hypervigilance, that sense of, oh no, here we go again. For a split second, I thought, really? After all the work I've done, I'm right back here. But here's what was fascinating. Instead of freezing or going into that fawn response that used to be my go-to survival strategy, I actually stayed present and reinforced my boundaries like a badass. I stood up for myself. I didn't collapse into that old pattern of maybe if I'm smaller, maybe if I don't make waves, maybe if I just accommodate, this will be safer. The anatomy of my response had fundamentally changed. Now, was there emotional fallout afterward? Absolutely. Did I need to process what happened? Of course. But here's the key difference. I could process it. I could talk about it. I could journal about it. I could understand it from different perspectives. I had tools. I had self-awareness. And most importantly, I trusted my ability to work through it because I'd done the deep work on the root cause. And I had dealt with this before. That's when it hit me. This is what happens when you've healed the baseline, when you've done the root cause work, and then life tests that healing. Your response system has fundamentally changed at a cellular level. And I realized that this is something that so many of my clients experience, but don't always have the language for. They'll come to me and say, something happened and I handled it differently than I ever have before, but I'm still handling quite a lot of emotions around it. Does this mean I'm not healing? No, beautiful human. That means you are healing. That means your trauma response has been rewired. That means the work is working. So let's break down what's actually happening when our nervous system gets activated. And listen carefully, because understanding this could be the difference between bouncing back and staying stuck. There are really three different experiences that can feel similar but have completely different anatomies. First, let's talk about triggers. A trigger is when something in your present environment reminds your nervous system of past trauma, and you have a trauma response, even though no actual danger is present right now. Your amygdala gets hijacked, your prefrontal cortex goes offline, and your body responds as if the past trauma is happening right now. Your partner raises their voice during a discussion, and suddenly you're 8 years old again, hiding in your bedroom. Someone doesn't text you back for a few hours, and your abandonment wound gets activated and throws you into spiraling thoughts about how they're going to leave you, even though logically you know they're probably just busy. This is your nervous system doing its job. It's trying to protect you based on past information. Your system is responding to a memory, not to present reality. The good news is, when you understand this, you can learn to work with it. EFT, nervous system regulation techniques, understanding your patterns. These tools help you recognize when you're being triggered and bring yourself back to the present moment. Second, we have traumatic memories coming to the surface. This is actually part of the healing process, and it looks a little bit different. Your psyche brings up old material when it feels safe enough to process it. You might be in therapy or doing some deep inner work, or just even in a really good place in your life. And suddenly you're remembering things from childhood or feeling emotions you haven't felt in years. This experience is your system working with you, not against you. It's saying, okay, we're ready to look at this now. We're ready to heal this. It can feel really overwhelming, but it's actually a sign that your nervous system trusts you enough to bring this material to the surface. And then we have what I experienced, new trauma occurring. This is when something genuinely traumatic happens in your present life. Not a trigger, not a memory, an actual new experience that your nervous system correctly identifies as a threat or a violation. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you've done deep root cause healing, your response to new trauma is completely different. Let me explain what I mean by root cause healing, because this is where everything changes. Most healing approaches, and I'm not knocking them, they all have their place, focus on managing symptoms. You're anxious, so here are some coping strategies for anxiety. You're depressed, so here's some medication, and let's work on those thought patterns. You keep choosing the wrong partners, so let's talk about what your expectations are and your communication skills. But what if the anxiety, the depression, and the relationship patterns, what if they're all just symptoms of something deeper? What if there's a root wound, an original trauma that happened early in life that's been driving all of these surface level issues? This is what I call the root cause. And when you heal the root cause, not just manage it, not just cope with it, but actually heal and integrate it, your entire nervous system upgrades. Here's what most people don't understand though. When you've only worked on symptoms, your nervous system is still operating from that original wounded blueprint. So when new trauma occurs, It gets layered onto all of that unhealed foundation. Your response comes from fragmentation, from survival mode, from that original wound. But when you've done root cause healing, when you've actually gone back to the beginning and healed that original wound, your response to new trauma comes from a completely different place. It comes from integration, from wholeness, from healed foundation. So when new trauma occurs after you've done deep healing work, instead of old survival strategies kicking in, the freeze, the fawn, the people pleasing, the shutting down, you respond from wholeness. You might fight back, you might set boundaries, you might protect yourself in ways you never could before. Resilience looks like this. You still feel the impact, you still need to process, but you're not trying to heal from a place of complete fragmentation anymore. You're processing from a place of integration. This is why some people can experience something difficult and bounce back in weeks, while others get stuck for months or even years. It's not about being stronger or weaker, it's about whether they've done the foundational healing work. So, how do you know which experience you're having? And more importantly, how do you work with each one? If you're being triggered, the first step is recognition. Triggers often feel disproportionate to the present situation. The intensity doesn't match what's actually happening. Can you pause and ask yourself, is this about what's happening right now? Or is this about something from our past? When you recognize that you're triggered, this is where nervous system regulation becomes your best friend. EFT tapping, breathing techniques, counting techniques, grounding techniques, anything that helps you come back to the present moment and get your prefrontal cortex back online. Then you can respond to what's actually happening right now, not what happened back then. If traumatic memories are coming to the surface, first of all, honor that your system trusts you enough to bring this material up. This process is actually a really good sign, even though it doesn't feel good. But please, 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 please don't try and process deep trauma alone. This is where working with someone who understands trauma-informed healing becomes crucial. You want to create safety as you explore these memories, not re-traumatize yourself in the process. And if you're dealing with new trauma, acknowledge that this is real. This isn't just your past stuff getting activated. Something actually happened. Your response is valid. And if you notice that your response is different than it used to be, if you're setting boundaries instead of people pleasing, if you're speaking up instead of shutting down, that's not coincidence. That's your healing in action. But here's what I really want you to understand. All of this becomes so much easier when you've done the root cause work. When you've identified that original wound and actually healed it, not just managed it, your entire relationship with difficult experiences changes. You stop being afraid of your own emotions because you know you can handle them. You stop avoiding conflict because you trust yourself to navigate it. You stop settling for less than you deserve because you know your worth at a cellular level. This is what I call becoming unbreakable. You become unbreakable in the sense that no matter what happens to you, you will rise and rebuild. That's where my program name comes from. It's not that you don't break, you are human, but you will get back up, rebuild, and step into the most resilient version of yourself. Let me share two different journeys that perfectly illustrate this anatomy of trauma concept, because I think seeing this in action through tangible examples will maybe help you to understand the difference a little bit better. I had a client, let's call her Diane, and she's completely okay with me sharing this anonymously, who came to me after 3 years of traditional therapy. She'd been working on her anxiety, relationship patterns, and people pleasing tendencies mostly. She had coping strategies, she understood her triggers intellectually, but here's what was so frustrating for her. She was so familiar with her patterns and could almost predict them, but they just kept repeating. She could not stop them. Diane was at the point where she wanted to quit on therapy completely because nothing was working, or at least it didn't feel like anything was working. She was taking medication to manage anxiety and depression, but whenever she stopped, she just started feeling exactly the same way. When something stressful happened, she'd still freeze up, still say yes when she meant no, and still attract partners who couldn't handle her emotions. Diane had been managing symptoms beautifully, but she hadn't touched the root cause. When we did the deep work, going back to that original wound from childhood where she learned that her needs weren't safe to express, everything shifted. Not just her understanding, but her actual nervous system response. About 8 months after we first started working together, so this was about 2 months after we completed her program, she contacted me. She told me about something that had happened and how she was dealing with it, but didn't understand whether the emotion she was feeling meant that she actually needed to come back and do more work. Here's what was actually happening and what was so beautiful. Her nervous system response had changed. The work had settled. She was feeling safer and she was purely processing at this point. I walked her through that part of it, helping her to understand exactly what had happened. This was what root cause healing looked like. It didn't mean that she would never be triggered again. It just meant that she would respond differently. Now, compare this to someone I know, not a client, but someone very close to me and a very dear person in my life who experienced a similar situation. She'd done years of surface level work, had all the right tools and techniques, but when this happened to her, she was devastated for months. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, she kept replaying the scenarios in her head, wondering if she was actually the problem. The situation triggered that original wound that hadn't been healed, and she was responding from a fragmented place. But here's what's beautiful about this part of the story. Even though she stayed stuck for so long, the situation actually caused her to decide to do the root cause work. It triggered the desire for transformation in her, and she's now on her own healing journey, which is absolutely beautiful to witness. Same type of experience, completely different recovery, because one had done the root cause healing and one hadn't. That's the anatomy of trauma in action. That's how some people manage to bounce back so easily. So let me leave you with 3 key takeaways that can change everything for you. First, learn to distinguish between triggers, traumatic memories coming to the surface, and new trauma. They require different approaches, and understanding what you're dealing with helps you respond appropriately instead of just reacting from old patterns. Second, if you've done deep healing work and you notice your response to difficult situations is different than it used to be, that's not a sign that something's wrong with you. That's a sign that something's very right. Your healing is working, even if it doesn't feel comfortable in the moment. And third, root cause healing changes everything. When you heal the original wound instead of just managing the symptoms, you develop a resilience that comes from integration, not just coping strategies. You become someone who can navigate whatever life throws at you because your nervous system has been fundamentally rewired. The difference between someone who bounces back quickly and someone who gets stuck isn't about their strength or their weakness. It's about whether they've done the foundational work to heal from the root cause up. Here's what I want you to understand about the cost of not knowing these distinctions, because this isn't just about feeling better, this affects every area of your life. When you don't understand the difference between triggers, memories, and new trauma, you end up treating everything the same way. You might spend years in therapy talking about the same patterns without ever touching the root cause. You might think you're broken because you keep having emotional reactions to things that supposedly shouldn't affect you anymore. I see this all the time. People who've been in therapy for 5, 10, even 15 years, and they're still struggling with the same core issues. They have incredible insight. They can analyze their patterns beautifully, but they're still living them out. That's because insight alone doesn't heal trauma. Understanding your triggers doesn't automatically stop you from being triggered. And here's the really costly part. When you don't heal the root cause, every new difficult experience gets layered onto that original wound. So instead of building resilience, you're actually becoming more fragile over time. Each betrayal, each disappointment, each loss adds to the pile instead of being processed and integrated. Think about the relationships this affects. How many connections have you lost because you couldn't regulate your nervous system in conflict? How many opportunities have you missed because your trauma response kicked in at the wrong moment? How many times have you settled for less than you deserve because your wounded parts were making the decisions? The emotional cost is staggering. The exhaustion of living in survival mode, the loneliness of not being able to connect authentically, the frustration of knowing better but not being able to do better, the years spent managing your wounds instead of actually healing them. This is why understanding the anatomy of trauma isn't just interesting, it's essential. It's the difference between spending your life managing your wounds and actually healing them. It's the difference between bouncing back and staying stuck. So, how do you know if you've done the root cause work or if you've been managing symptoms? Let me give you a framework to assess where you are. If you've only done surface level work, here's what happens when life hits you with something difficult. You feel completely overwhelmed, like you're back at square one. Your old coping mechanisms take over. Maybe you shut down, maybe you people please, maybe you go into fix it mode. That's my favorite. You might have tools to help you feel better, but you're using them to manage the intensity rather than to process what's actually happening. Recovery takes a long time, and you often feel like you're starting over with your entire journey. But if you've done the root cause work, the experience is different. Yes, you still feel the impact of the difficult experiences, but you don't lose yourself in them. You might have an initial trauma response, but you can recognize it, regulate it, and respond from a place of choice rather than reaction. You have tools, but you're using them to process and integrate, not just to cope. Most importantly, though, you trust yourself to handle whatever comes up because you've done it before. Here are some specific questions to ask yourself. When something triggers you, can you distinguish between what's happening to you right now and what happened back then? When you're in conflict, can you stay present and communicate your needs? Or do you automatically go into old survival patterns like dissociation or shutting down? When someone treats you poorly, do you question your worth? Or do you recognize that their behavior is about them and not you? Do you find yourself attracting the same types of people and situations over and over again? Or have your patterns genuinely shifted? When you set boundaries, do you feel guilty and second guess yourself? Or do you feel clear and confident in your decisions? If you're recognizing that you might still be managing symptoms rather than healing root causes, that's not a failure, that's awareness. And awareness is always the first step toward transformation. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you that healing isn't linear, and there's no timeline you need to be on. Your healing journey is as unique as you are. Whether you're just starting to recognize your patterns, whether you're deep in the middle of the work, Or you're on the other side wondering why you're still processing these stupid emotions. All of this is valid. All of this is part of your journey. Your wounds are your spiritual curriculum, and you get to move through that curriculum at your own pace, in your own way, with your own understanding of what feels right for you. If today's conversation resonated with you, if you're recognizing that maybe you've been managing symptoms instead of healing root causes, or if you're curious about what it would look like to develop that unbreakable resilience we talked about, I want you to know that this work is possible. Context is everything in healing work. There's no cookie-cutter approach because your story, your wounds, your healing journey, all of it is uniquely yours. But the principles we talked about today, they are universal. Root cause healing changes everything. Thank you for being here, for doing this work, for choosing healing over just surviving. The world needs more people who understand transformation, who are willing to break cycles instead of repeating them, and that's exactly what you're doing by being here. I'll see you in 2 weeks for another root cause conversation. Until then, be gentle with yourself, trust your process, and remember, you're more resilient than you think, and you're exactly where you need to be. Thank you, dear soul, for joining me on Back to the Beginning. If this episode resonated with you, please rate this podcast and share it with somebody else who needs the message. When you rate this podcast and take a screenshot, send it to us via DM on Instagram and we'll send you a free healing resource as our gift to you. Find all our programs and connect with me at www.expergotherapy.com, where transformation meets practical reality. Until next time, remember, you have everything within you to heal and connect authentically. See you next episode.